What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken activists sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to have the entire conversation explode into one of the most uncomfortable moments in morning television history? Today, we're breaking down the Jane Fonda and Jacob Soboroff clash that has everyone talking, the tension, the accusations, the moment everything fell apart on live television. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts on celebrity activism. Now let's dive in. The Today Show studio had that familiar morning energy. Bright lights illuminating the set as Jane Fonda settled into the interview chair across from Jacob Soboroff. The segment was supposed to focus on her latest environmental initiative, a project she had been passionate about for months. Soboroff opened with what seemed like a straightforward question about her activism work, his tone friendly and conversational. "Jane, you've been at the forefront of environmental causes for decades now. Can you talk about what drives this particular campaign and why now?" Soboroff asked, leaning forward slightly with his notepad ready. Fonda smiled, launching into her talking points about climate change and corporate responsibility. Her voice carried that trademark confidence, each word measured and deliberate. "We're at a critical juncture, Jacob. The science is clear. The data is undeniable. And yet we still have people in positions of power who refuse to act. This campaign is about holding those people accountable." Soboroff nodded along, but then he shifted gears. "Speaking of accountability, there's been some criticism about celebrity activism in general. Some people argue that wealthy celebrities advocating for causes while maintaining lavish lifestyles sends a mixed message. How do you respond to that?" The shift in Fonda's expression was subtle but noticeable. Her smile tightened just a fraction. "I think that's a convenient way for people to dismiss important messages, Jacob. The focus should be on the issues, not on who's delivering them. But don't you think there's validity to the question of authenticity?" Soboroff pressed, his journalistic instincts kicking in. "When someone flies private jets while advocating for carbon reduction, doesn't that undermine the message?" Fonda's posture stiffened. "Are you asking me specifically about my travel habits, or are you making a broader point about activism?" "I'm asking about the disconnect that some people see," Soboroff replied, maintaining his professional demeanor. "It's a conversation that's happening in the public sphere, and I think our viewers would want to hear your perspective on it. What I find interesting," Fonda said, her tone cooling noticeably, "is that this line of questioning always seems to come up when women, particularly older women, speak out about important issues. Male activists rarely face this level of scrutiny about their personal lives." Soboroff shook his head slightly. "With respect, Jane, that's not what this is about. Leonardo DiCaprio has faced similar criticism. So has Al Gore. This isn't a gender issue, isn't it though?" Fonda leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like every time I try to discuss substantive policy issues, I get redirected to questions about my lifestyle, my past, my personal choices." "When was the last time you interviewed a male environmental activist and spent the first 5 minutes of the conversation questioning his right to speak on the issue?" The energy in the studio shifted palpably. Soboroff adjusted in his seat, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. "Jane, I'm not questioning your right to speak on anything. I'm asking legitimate questions that reflect concerns people have expressed." "People," Fonda repeated, making air quotes with her fingers. "Or is it certain media outlets that have a vested interest in discrediting activists who threaten their corporate sponsors?" Soboroff's eyebrows raised. "That's a serious accusation. Are you suggesting that NBC News, the network you're currently appearing on, is somehow compromised?" "I'm suggesting," Fonda said carefully, "that questions about my personal carbon footprint are designed to distract from the real issue, which is systemic corporate pollution and government inaction. And yes, I find it curious that these questions always seem to come up when the conversation gets too close to uncomfortable truths about who benefits from the status quo." "Jane, I think you're reading something into this that isn't there," Soboroff countered, his voice remaining steady but firm. "These are questions that everyday Americans are asking. People who work hard, who can't afford the luxury of choosing how they travel, who see celebrities advocating for sacrifices they themselves don't appear to make. That's not manufactured controversy, that's genuine concern about credibility." Fonda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Genuine concern about credibility. That's rich, coming from a network that gives equal airtime to climate deniers and actual scientists. As if both sides deserve the same platform. You want to talk about credibility? Let's talk about journalistic responsibility." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Soboroff's jaw tightened. "We give airtime to different perspectives because that's what journalism does. We present information and let viewers make up their own minds." "No, Jacob, what you do is create false equivalence." Fonda shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You put a scientist who has spent 40 years studying climate data next to a politician whose campaign is funded by oil companies. And you treat both as if they have equal claim to truth. That's not journalism, that's entertainment, disguised as news." That's not fair, Soboroff interjected, his professional composure starting to show cracks. We do in-depth reporting on climate issues all the time. Do you? Fonda challenged. Or do you do segments about polar bears and melting ice caps that make people feel sad for 5 minutes before you cut to a commercial for SUV? Real climate coverage would mean investigating which corporations are blocking legislation, naming the politicians who take their money, following the paper trail. But that would upset sponsors, wouldn't it? Soboroff set down his notepad, a clear signal that this interview was going off the rails. Jane, I invited you here today to talk about your environmental initiative, to give you a platform to share your message. Instead, you're attacking the very outlet that's giving you that opportunity. And there it is, Fonda said, pointing at him. The classic silencing tactic. Be grateful for the platform. Don't bite the hand that feeds. Stay in your lane. Smile and promote your project, and don't ask difficult questions about why things never actually change, despite all these awareness campaigns and celebrity initiatives. That's not what I'm saying at all, Soboroff protested. But you can't come onto a news program and then object to being asked news questions. That's literally my job. Your job, Fonda said, her voice taking on a sharp edge, should be to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Instead, you're doing the opposite. You're making activists defend their right to speak while giving power brokers a pass. You're focusing on individual behavior while systemic destruction continues unchecked. The studio crew exchanged glances. This was clearly not going according to plan. Soboroff took a breath, visibly trying to reset the conversation. Okay, let's take a step back. Can we talk about the specifics of your campaign? What are you actually asking people to do? Fonda's eyes narrowed at the suggestion of a reset. You want to talk specifics? Fine. The campaign is calling for binding emissions targets, not voluntary corporate pledges that mean nothing. We're demanding an end to fossil fuel subsidies, which total billions of taxpayer dollars every year going to the most profitable industry in human history. We're pushing for a transition plan that protects workers in fossil fuel industries while creating new jobs in renewable energy. Those are the specifics, Jacob, but I guarantee you that's not what will make it into the final edit of this segment. Soboroff looked directly into the camera, then back at Fonda. We're live, Jane. There is no edit. Everything you're saying is going out to millions of viewers right now. A flicker of something crossed Fonda's face. Surprise, maybe, but she didn't back down. Good, then maybe they'll hear something real for once instead of the sanitized, both sides version that passes for news these days. You keep taking shots at journalism, Soboroff said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But you're using a journalistic platform to get your message out. You called us. Your publicist reached out to book this segment. So which is it? Are we valueless entertainment, or are we important enough that you want to be here? I'm here because I'm trying to work within a broken system, Fonda replied. Do you think I don't see the irony? I absolutely do. But when the alternative is silence, when the alternative is letting the narrative be controlled entirely by people who profit from inaction, then yes, I'll come on your show. I'll use whatever platform I can get. That doesn't mean I can't point out the fundamental problems with how these conversations are structured. Soboroff leaned back, crossing his arms. So we're damned if we do, and damned if we don't. If we don't cover climate issues, we're ignoring the most important story of our time. If we do cover them, but ask challenging questions, we're part of the problem. There's no winning with you. You could start by not treating this like a game where someone wins or loses. Fonda shot back. This isn't about scoring points, Jacob. This is about survival. And yes, I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to be uncomfortable to deal with. Because comfortable conversations lead to comfortable audiences who feel like they've engaged with an issue by watching a 7-minute segment, and then they go about their day without changing a single thing. Say your strategy is to alienate people, Soboroff asked, genuine confusion in his voice. To come across as angry and confrontational, and somehow that's going to inspire change. Fonda's laugh was bitter. You know what alienates people? Watching their communities destroyed by floods and fires while politicians they elected take money from the industries causing the destruction. That alienates people. Watching their children inherit a planet that's becoming uninhabitable, that alienates people. My tone in a television interview is the least alienating thing happening right now. But tone matters, Soboroff insisted. How you deliver a message affects whether people hear it. You have to know that coming in this hot is going to turn off a significant portion of the audience. The audience that needs to hear this message already isn't listening. Jacob, they've been conditioned to dismiss anything that challenges their comfort. I could come in here speaking in the gentlest, most diplomatic tones imaginable, and those people would still find a reason to discredit what I'm saying. So forgive me if I've stopped performing palatability for people who were never going to change their minds anyway. Soboroff shook his head. That's incredibly cynical. You're basically saying there's no point in trying to persuade anyone. No, I'm saying persuasion requires more than nice words and good manners. It requires disruption. It requires making people uncomfortable enough that they can't just nod along and forget about it 5 minutes later. Every major social movement in history understood this. Suffragettes weren't polite. Civil rights activists weren't polite. They were disruptive. They were confrontational. And they changed the world precisely because they refused to play by the rules of decorum that were designed to keep them powerless. Are you seriously comparing your environmental activism to the civil rights movement? Soboroff asked, his voice rising slightly. I'm comparing the tactics of successful movements throughout history, Fonda clarified. And yes, climate justice is a civil rights issue. It disproportionately affects poor communities and communities of color. It's the biggest human rights crisis of our time. But you don't want to talk about that because it gets complicated and messy and it might offend someone. Now you're putting words in my mouth, Soboroff countered. I never said I don't want to talk about environmental justice. In fact, I've done extensive reporting on exactly that topic. Then why didn't you open with that? Fonda challenged. Why did we start with questions about my lifestyle and celebrity credibility instead of the substance of the issue? Because that's easier. That's safer. That fits into the entertainment model of news where personalities matter more than policy. Soboroff was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had a harder edge. You want to know why I asked those questions? Because our viewers ask them. Because I get emails and messages from people who want to know why they should listen to someone who they perceive as living in a bubble, disconnected from their daily struggles. That's not me manufacturing controversy. That's me representing the legitimate skepticism that exists out there. And that skepticism, Fonda said, has been carefully cultivated by decades of propaganda from industries that profit from doubt. You're not representing organic viewer concerns. You're amplifying talking points that were focus grouped by public relations firms. That skepticism didn't just appear naturally. It was created, funded, and spread deliberately. And journalists like you give it credibility by treating it as valid. So anyone who questions celebrity activism has been brainwashed by corporate propaganda. Soboroff asked incredulously. You don't think there might be genuine, thoughtful people who have reservations about how advocacy works in this country? Of course there are, Fonda acknowledged. And I would love to have substantive debates about the most effective strategies for creating change. But that's not what you were asking about. You were asking about private jets and personal carbon footprints. You were asking gotcha questions designed to put me on the defensive rather than engaging with the actual policy proposals I'm advocating for. They weren't gotcha questions, Soboroff protested. They were questions about consistency between message and action. That's basic accountability. Accountability, Fonda repeated slowly. Let me ask you something, Jacob. When was the last time you had a CEO on this show and asked them to account for their company's carbon emissions? When did you last grill a senator about the fossil fuel money in their campaign war chest? When did you demand that a billionaire explain why they're buying bunkers in New Zealand while funding climate denial? Because if we're talking about accountability, let's make sure we're applying it evenly. Soboroff's jaw clenched. We interview politicians and business leaders all the time and ask tough questions. Do you though? Fonda pressed. Or do you ask them to comment on the latest political theater while avoiding anything that might cost you access? Because access journalism has destroyed actual investigative reporting. Everyone's so afraid of losing their precious access to power that they've forgotten how to speak truth to it. That's a hell of an accusation to make with absolutely no evidence, Soboroff said, his voice tight. The evidence is everywhere, if you're willing to look, Fonda replied. It's in the stories that don't get covered. It's in the questions that don't get asked. It's in the experts who don't get invited on because they're too radical, meaning they don't accept the narrow bounds of acceptable discourse. The evidence is in how every conversation about climate change eventually gets as a debate about individual responsibility instead of corporate accountability. You act like there's some grand conspiracy, Soboroff said, like we all get together in a back room and decide what narratives to push. That's not how it works. We're doing the best we can with limited time and resources to cover incredibly complex issues. I'm not talking about conspiracy, Fonda clarified. I'm talking about structural incentives. When your network depends on advertising revenue from companies that profit from the status quo, when your parent company has financial interests that conflict with aggressive climate action, you don't need a conspiracy. You just need people who want to keep their jobs, who don't want to rock the boat, who convince themselves that both sides in everything is objectivity, when really, it's cowardice. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Soboroff's face flushed slightly. Cowardice. You're calling journalists who put themselves in danger zones, who investigate corruption, who hold power accountable every single day, cowards. I'm saying that real courage in journalism today would mean risking your career to tell stories that your bosses don't want told, Fonda said quietly but intensely. It would mean naming names and following money, even when it leads to uncomfortable places. It would mean accepting that objectivity is a myth and that the most honest thing you can do is be transparent about your values and your perspective, instead of hiding behind false neutrality. Soboroff sat forward, his professional mask slipping entirely. You don't get to question my integrity. You don't know me. You don't know what stories I've fought to get on air. what pushback I've faced, what risks I've taken. You come in here with your decades of fame and fortune, your ability to say whatever you want without real consequences, and you lecture me about courage. What consequences do you think I don't face? Fonda fired back. Do you think it's easy being a woman my age in the public eye? Do you think I don't get death threats? Do you think my career hasn't suffered because I refuse to shut up and look pretty? The difference between us, Jacob, is that I've accepted those consequences. I've decided that my comfort, my reputation, my popularity matters less than saying what needs to be said, and I haven't. Soboroff's voice was rising now, the careful modulation of the professional broadcaster giving way to genuine emotion. You think I don't make sacrifices? You think I don't lie awake at night wondering if I pushed hard enough, if I asked the right questions, if I let someone off too easy? This job isn't easy, and it sure as hell isn't helped by people like you who treat every journalist as if we're all complicit in some great betrayal. Maybe if you stopped being so defensive, you'd realize I'm not attacking you personally, Fonda said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm attacking a system that you're part of, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. You can be a good person, a well-intentioned journalist, and still be a cog in a machine that serves power instead of challenging it. That's a convenient way to make sweeping accusations while claiming you're not being personal. Soboroff shot back. You're saying the work I do is meaningless, that I am a cog in a corrupt machine, but somehow that's not personal. How am I supposed to take that? Take it as a wake-up call, Fonda said sharply. Take it as an opportunity to examine whether the constraints you work under are actually necessary, or whether you've just accepted them as inevitable. Take it as a challenge to do better, to be braver, to stop accepting the limitations that have been placed on what journalism is allowed to be. You don't get to define what journalism is supposed to be, Soboroff countered. You're an actor, an activist. You're not a reporter. You don't understand the ethical frameworks we work within, the standards we have to maintain, the responsibility we have to get things right. Fonda's eyes flashed, and there it is again, dismissing me because of who I am rather than engaging with what I'm saying. You want to hide behind professional standards and ethical frameworks as if those things exist in a vacuum, as if they weren't created by and for a certain kind of status quo journalism that serves institutional power. Those standards exist to protect truth, Soboroff insisted, to make sure we're not just spreading propaganda or opinion dressed up as fact. You might not value that distinction, but I do. It matters. Of course it matters, Fonda agreed impatiently, but you're using it as a shield. You're using objectivity as an excuse to avoid taking positions on issues where the truth is actually quite clear. Climate change is real. Fossil fuel companies have known about it for decades and lied deliberately. Politicians who take their money are complicit. Those aren't opinions, Jacob, those are facts. But you treat them like they're up for debate, because acknowledging them as facts would require journalism that makes powerful people uncomfortable. We report on climate science constantly, Soboroff said through gritted teeth. We've done countless segments on fossil fuel companies, on political funding, on all of it. But we also give people the opportunity to respond, to defend themselves, to present their perspective. That's fairness. It's false balance, Fonda corrected. And it's killing us, literally. Every day you spend pretending there are two legitimate sides to the climate debate is a day we lose in the fight to prevent catastrophe. Every interview where you let a politician dodge and weave with talking points, instead of pinning them down with facts, is a victory. For the people who want nothing to change, Soboroff rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of pure frustration. What exactly do you want from me, Jane? What would satisfy you? Should I just become an activist myself? Should I throw out every principle of journalism and turn the news into advocacy? Is that what you think would serve the public better? I think honesty would serve the public better, Fonda said, her voice cutting through the tension. I think admitting that objectivity is impossible would serve the public better. I think transparency about the constraints you work under, about the economic realities that shape editorial decisions, about the access and relationship management that influences coverage, all of that would serve the public infinitely better than the pretense that you're some neutral arbiter of truth standing outside the fray. That's not what we claim to be, Soboroff protested. We're transparent about our process, about our sources, about our limitations. What more do you want? I want you to stop acting like the current system of journalism is the only possible version, Fonda said intensely. I want you to imagine what news could be if it wasn't beholden to corporate interests, if it wasn't afraid of offending advertisers or losing access to politicians. I want you to question why entertainment news and celebrity gossip get more airtime than climate science. I want you to ask yourself who benefits from the way stories are currently told and who suffers from the stories that don't get told at all. You're describing some utopian version of journalism that doesn't exist and never has existed, Soboroff said. Every era has had its constraints, its pressures, its problems. We do the best we can with what we have. And that attitude, Fonda said, pointing at him again, is exactly why things never fundamentally change. Because good people doing their best within a broken system will never be enough. At some point, you have to be willing to break the system itself. Break it and replace it with what? Soboroff asked. Your version of activism journalism, where only certain voices get heard and only certain perspectives are valid. That's not journalism. That's propaganda. It's propaganda when you lie, Fonda clarified. It's advocacy when you tell the truth from a particular moral position. And yes, I believe journalism should have a moral position. I believe it should stand on the side of human survival, of justice, of protecting the vulnerable from the powerful. If that makes me a propagandist in your eyes, then I guess we disagree on what journalism is fundamentally for. Journalism is for informing the public so they can make their own decisions, Soboroff said firmly. It's not our job to tell people what to think or what to do. We present the information and trust that citizens can evaluate it and reach their own conclusions. Fonda leaned forward, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than anger, something closer to contempt. And how's that working out? How's that trust in the informed citizenry going? Because from where I'm sitting, we have a planet that's burning, democracies that are crumbling, inequality that's spiraling out of control. And your precious informed citizens keep making choices that serve the interests of the powerful few over the survival of the many. Maybe, just maybe, the model is broken. Or maybe, Soboroff countered, his own voice low and tense. People are making choices you don't agree with, and you can't accept that in a democracy, you don't always get what you want. You don't get to override other people's judgment just because you think you know better, when their judgment is based on lies and manipulation. Yes, I do think I know better, Fonda said unapologetically. When people have been systematically deceived by well-funded disinformation campaigns, when they've been fed a steady diet of distraction and division, when the media they consume has failed them at every level, then yes, their judgment is compromised. And pretending otherwise is just lazy thinking. That's incredibly condescending, Soboroff said, his voice rising again. You're basically calling millions of people stupid, saying they can't think for themselves, that they need you and people like you to tell them what's true and what matters. I'm saying they've been lied to and they deserve better, Fonda clarified, though there was heat in her words. I'm saying the institutions that are supposed to serve them, including journalism, have let them down. I'm saying we're all products of the information ecosystem we live in, and when that ecosystem is polluted with lies and nonsense, we all suffer. That's not condescension. That's reality. It's your version of reality. Soboroff shot back. Your interpretation, which you're absolutely certain is correct, and anyone who disagrees is either lying or deluded. That's not advocacy, Jane. That's arrogance. The accusation hung between them, sharp and personal. Fonda's face hardened. Call it whatever you want. I'd rather be arrogant and right than humble and complicit. I'd rather fight and lose than smile politely while everything burns. And you think I can't? Soboroff asked quietly, the hurt evident in his voice. I think you could, Fonda said, her tone softening just slightly. I think you're capable of more than what this system allows. But comfort is seductive, Jacob. Security is seductive, and it's easier to convince yourself that you're doing enough than to risk everything by doing what's actually necessary. Soboroff's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. You talk about risk like you're the only one who takes them, like the rest of us are just cowards playing it safe. That's not fair, and you know it. Then prove me wrong, Fonda challenged. Right now, tell the truth about something you've been afraid to say. Tell viewers about a story you wanted to pursue but couldn't. Tell them about the phone calls from executives, the pressure to soften language, the fear of losing access. Be honest about how this really works. The studio went deadly quiet. Every crew member seemed to freeze, waiting to see if Soboroff would take the bait. He stared at Fonda, his jaw working, clearly weighing his options. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. You're trying to bait me into committing career suicide on live television. You want me to give you a moment, a clip that'll go viral, where I trash the network and my colleagues. And you think that would be brave? That would just be stupid. Or honest, Fonda pressed. There's a difference between being strategic and being complicit. You're smart enough to find a way to tell the truth without destroying yourself. Unless you're more afraid of discomfort than you are of what's happening to the world. Stop questioning my fear, Soboroff snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. You don't get to sit there in your bubble of wealth and fame and decades of being able to say whatever you want and judge the rest of us for trying to navigate impossible situations. You want to talk about privilege? That's privilege. The privilege of not needing this job, not needing these relationships, not needing to play by any rules because you've already made it. Fonda's eyes narrowed. I've paid for every word I've said. I've been blacklisted. I've been threatened. I've lost roles and opportunities in relationships because I refuse to be quiet. Don't you dare suggest I haven't sacrificed different sacrifices. Soboroff shot back. You sacrificed from a position of already having made it. You had the luxury of choosing principle over career because you'd already had the career. Some of us are still building ours. Some of us have families to support, mortgages to pay, futures to secure. It's easy to be righteous when you're already set for life. So what are you saying? Fonda asked, her voice dangerously quiet. That economic pressure justifies moral compromise. That as long as you have bills to pay, you get a pass on telling the truth. I'm saying the world is complicated, Soboroff said, his voice rising. I'm saying not everyone has the freedom to burn everything down in the name of purity. I'm saying some of us are trying to do good work within constraints that you apparently think disqualify us from even trying. Those constraints are the problem, Fonda insisted. And as long as people like you accept them as inevitable, nothing changes. You're so busy protecting your position that you've forgotten what the position is supposed to be for. To inform people, Soboroff said firmly. To give them the information they need to make decisions, not to make the decisions for them. Not to be an activist with a press credential. And how's that information serving them? Fonda asked. When the information comes filtered through corporate interests, watered down by legal departments, sanitized to avoid offending sponsors, is that really information? Or is it just another form of entertainment? A simulation of journalism that makes people feel informed while keeping them essentially ignorant. Soboroff stood up abruptly, his mic pack nearly pulling loose. I can't do this anymore. This isn't an interview, it's an ambush. You didn't come here to talk about your campaign. You came here to attack me, to attack journalism, to make yourself look righteous at everyone else's expense. I came here to wake you up, Fonda said, also standing. I came here to shake loose whatever part of you still remembers why you got into journalism in the first place. Before the access, before the relationships, before the careful calibration of every word to avoid offending anyone who matters. You don't know anything about why I do this, Soboroff said, his voice shaking slightly. You don't know what I believe or what I fight for or what keeps me up at night. You just know your narrative, your story about corrupt media and complicit journalists. And anything that doesn't fit that story gets dismissed. Then tell me I'm wrong, Fonda said, stepping closer. Tell me you're doing everything you can. Tell me there's nothing more you could risk, nothing more you could say. No truth you're holding back because it's inconvenient or dangerous or unpopular. Tell me that and mean it. Soboroff met her gaze, and for a moment something flickered there. Uncertainty maybe, or recognition. But then his professional mask slammed back into place. This interview is over. That's what I thought, Fonda said quietly. Soboroff looked directly at the camera. We need to go to commercial. We're live. Someone from the crew called out. There is no commercial. The reality of that seemed to hit Soboroff hard. Everything that had just happened, every word, every accusation, had gone out unfiltered to millions of viewers. His face went pale. Fonda watched him process this, and her expression softened almost to sympathy. Welcome to the moment where you have to choose. Jacob, right here, right now. Do you end this and try to pretend it didn't happen? Smooth it over, protect yourself. Or do you lean into it? Do you use this moment for something real? Soboroff looked lost, genuinely lost. Like a man standing at a crossroads he never expected to reach. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and raw. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do what you're asking. Yes you do, Fonda said gently. You're just afraid. And that's okay. Fear is human. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Soboroff sat back down slowly, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at Fonda, then at the camera, then back at Fonda. You're right that there are constraints. You're right that we don't always ask the hardest questions or pursue the most uncomfortable truths. But it's not all corporate conspiracy. Sometimes it's just, we're tired. We're overwhelmed. We're trying to cover everything with limited resources and limited time, and it feels like nothing we do is ever enough. The admission hung in the air, vulnerable and honest. Fonda nodded slowly. That's a start, but I still think you're wrong about a lot of this, Soboroff continued, finding his footing. I still think journalism serves a purpose, even in its imperfect form. I still think objectivity, even if it's not perfectly achievable, is worth striving for. I also think you're right that we could be braver. That I could be braver, then be braver, Fonda said simply. Starting tomorrow. Starting with the next interview, the next story, the next moment when you have to choose between what's easy and what's true. Soboroff gave a slight, exhausted laugh. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, Fonda acknowledged. But it's necessary. And you're capable of it. That's what makes this conversation matter. If I thought you were hopeless, I wouldn't bother fighting with you. They looked at each other for a long moment, the antagonism of the past minutes giving way to something more complex. A strange mutual respect born from honest conflict. Soboroff finally turned to the camera. I think that's all the time we have, he said, his voice steadier now. Jane Fonda, thank you for that. Thank you for not walking off. Fonda replied. I considered it, Soboroff admitted with a wry smile. I know you did, Fonda said, but you didn't. Remember that? And that's where this incredible, uncomfortable, necessary conversation ends. This wasn't your typical morning show interview. This was raw, this was real, and this was exactly the kind of dialogue we need more of. Even when it's difficult, even when it makes us squirm. So what do you think? Was Jane Fonda out of line, or was she exactly as aggressive as the moment required? Was Jacob Soboroff too defensive, or was he protecting legitimate principles? Drop your comments below and let's keep this conversation going. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep bringing you these unfiltered moments that matter. Here's my question for you. If you were in Jacob Soboroff's position, what would you have done differently? Comment below and let me know.